As you've heard tonight, America has begun to forcefully disarm Iraq.
Let's get the very latest from Lou Young in Kuwait City, where it's just after 7:30 tomorrow morning. Lou?
Yeah, and it's Thursday morning here, and it is the weekend here in Kuwait. The war began with a limited airstrike in Baghdad on a target of opportunity, but we can tell you that the bulk of the forces out in the desert here are still on standby, not yet rolling, still waiting for the official big start, the big shock and awe start for this campaign, Operation Iraqi Freedom. The capital remains calm, and biochemical sniffer vehicles have been out this morning checking the air for possible chemical retaliation. So far, they have detected nothing. The Kuwait capital remains calm. That's the situation here. We'll keep you posted from this post in Kuwait City. Lou Young, CBS 2 News.
Thank you very much, Lou.
And stay tuned to CBS 2 News for continuing live coverage overseas and here in the New York area on the showdown with Saddam and the countdown to war. We'll bring you all the latest developments as they happen.
And thanks for joining us tonight. Get the latest on all the day's top stories starting tomorrow morning at 5 here on CBS 2.
Right now, we're going to send it back to CBS News anchor Dan Rather with the very latest on Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow.
Good night.
Shots of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Tomahawk cruise missiles fired from U.S. warships in at least one submarine aimed at Baghdad and possibly Saddam Hussein himself. America is at war.
This is a CBS News special report, part of our continuing coverage of America at War. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
It was just over 90 minutes beyond President Bush's deadline for Saddam Hussein to leave Iraq that U.S. warships and planes, there were F-117 stealth bombers involved, launched the opening salvo of Operation Iraqi Freedom. The attack came in waves, cruise missiles, followed by the F-117 stealth bombers with so-called bunker-busting bombs. Their target, a bunker believed to be sheltering what are called top leaders of the Iraqi regime. Now, this is what it looked and sounded like in Baghdad. It was this short, and this is what happened. And after the big blast began to die down, there was Iraqi anti-aircraft fire. You may want to note that President Bush, in his address to the nation, said that this was a target of opportunity. And we're now getting a report from Jim Axelrod, who is with the 3rd Infantry Division in northern Kuwait, who says that the troops there have been told 2 divisions of Iraqi soldiers are ready to surrender. The divisions are identified as the Iraqi 11th and 51st Divisions. Now, these are the People's Army of Iraq. There are 3 tiers. There's the People's Army, there are the Republican Guards, and then there are the elite Republican Guards. These 2 divisions are apparently from the lower category. Now, Jim Axelrod, whom we have up now, I believe, by video phone, has a report on the targets. There were various reports and rumors earlier as to who was expected to be in the bunkers or bunker that was hit, but we now have some more solid information which we believe we can report. Jim Axelrod. Jim?
Dan, I'm with the 3rd Infantry Division, which are the group that is expected to be among the first ground troops across. Now, I just attended a briefing. The 3rd Infantry is divided into 3 combat brigades. I was just in a briefing for the 1st Combat Brigade, the officers there. 3 bullets out of that. The 11th and the 51st Divisions of the People's Army of Iraq, as you're describing, Dan, are expected to capitulate. This is the intelligence briefing. They are expected to capitulate. Now, this means 10, 11, 12,000 soldiers per division. This is southern Iraq. Those two divisions, again, expected to capitulate. That's bullet one. Also reported in this briefing, there has been no activity as of yet, stressing as of yet, no activity reported around the Ramallah oil fields. A significant problem in the past. Some worry about the lighting of the oil fields. We can report very early on there appears to be no activity, Iraqi activity, around those oil fields. Third, Dan, we have been given orders, or the soldiers have been given orders here, and the media as well, been told that they will be leaving the position, which is in several miles within the Iraqi border. They will be moving their positions within the hour. So an hour ago I reported to you that there was no movement in this camp. That has changed quite a bit in the last hour, a flurry of activity now, and this unit, the 1st Brigade Combat Team, the 3rd Infantry Division, will be on the move within the hour. Dan?
Jim Axelrod reporting live from Kuwait. We were talking about the targets, what intelligence had told the military, what the military had found out about who might be in these target areas. As I say, there were some earlier reports, including some rumors of who might be in there. David Martin, the Pentagon, now has some more solid information. David?
Dan, the more phone calls I make, the clearer it is to me that they thought that Saddam Hussein might be among those leaders, and that this strike, which the more details we learn, was a very considerable strike involving 36 cruise missiles, 2 F-117 bombers, each dropping a pair of 2,000-pound bombs, I believe. That is a lot of ordnance on a target. So they put everything they had into going after this bunker. They thought somebody very important was there, if not Saddam Hussein himself, then senior members of his ruling clique. We don't know what the intelligence was, and almost certainly it was a very secret source of intelligence, and it may be some time before we do know. But clearly what happened is that sometime in the late afternoon, the CIA got this intelligence, took it immediately to the president. There was a meeting in the Oval Office that began around 4:30, included the President, the Director of the CIA, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State. And at that meeting, they made the decision to conduct this strike, and the President gave the order to carry it out, and something like 5 hours later, it was carried out. So this was about as high priority a mission as you can imagine. Now, it obviously remains to be seen what success the strikes had. We do not know now if they succeeded in destroying the bunker, and we do not, of course, know who really was in that bunker. That is going to take some time to find out.
David, there are reports, unconfirmed reports floating out there, not ours, that say they were tracking 5 members of the Iraqi senior hierarchy: Saddam himself, his son Oday, his oldest son, Quasi, another of his sons, and 2 senior commanders. Have we confirmed that? We know we've heard that, but do we have solid information on that?
I don't myself, Dan. I always thought the number was 14 that they considered to be the war criminals in Saddam's ruling clique. Whether they had the intelligence assets to track all 14 of those, I really don't know.
David Martin live at the Pentagon, and one wants to raise one question mark, whether Saddam Hussein would be with both of his sons in the same place. We simply don't know. We have to put that in the category of question mark. Retired U.S. Army General Buck Kernan, if Saddam has been hit, will that change the timing of the coming attack if it can be confirmed?
It could be. It could change it significantly. I think it's important to point out here that less than 2 hours after this attack, you've got 2 divisions that are all ready to surrender. That's pretty unusual. That suggests that the word's already gone out that something of significance was hit and possibly destroyed. Panic and confusion is very infectious and can run rampant very quickly through the Iraqi forces. So yes, I think if the opportunity presents itself for a rapid capitulation of the Iraqi forces, the thing we want to do is very quickly move in and ensure that we can stabilize the situation.
General Buck Kernan. Now let's go to retired Air Force General Perry Smith. General Smith, in the little time we have remaining, put it in context for us, this raid.
Well, it was an important raid, a raid of F-117A airplanes, single-seat stealthy airplanes, probably coming out of Kuwait. We used those in the Gulf War. We've used them since. They carry 2 bombs. They're GBU-27 bombs. These are hardened 2,000-pound bombs, bunker busters that go deep into a target, so they have great potential. And then, of course, we use cruise missiles. And the cruise missiles came out of Navy ships, the Donald Cook in the Red Sea, and also out of submarines in the Red Sea, and also out of surface ships in the Persian Gulf, coming in from 2 different directions, across Saudi Arabia, across Kuwait to hit the target. So you have a double bang. You have the possibility of hitting with cruise missiles that have certain potential and target possibilities, and also 2,000-pound bombs that can penetrate more deeply. And then as you look at the larger picture here, I think it's important to understand that if the Turks give us permission, if they give us permission to overfly, that's terribly important, because we can put tanker tracks up here so that the airplanes coming in from Europe, coming in from the States, can hit the tankers and come in. It's a lot shorter distance coming in through Turkey than it is going all the way around here. And we hope then, as we go forward then, that when the air attack comes in, it can come in from multiple directions and be particularly powerful in the days ahead.
General Smith, we talk a lot about the weaponry. We show people the weapons. We talk about what carried the weapons, aircraft, submarines, firing missiles. But there's a reality on the ground when this kind of strike takes place. Now, with this kind of weaponry, let's make it a given that it is precise. But when you deliver this kind of weaponry, what's the danger to the civilian population on the ground?
Well, the danger is much, much less because of the fact that it's very, very accurate. And also, we've learned a lot from precision weapons and how they come in and the direction they come in, and the bomb bursts that they create. We try to have them come in so that the bomb burst does not go towards civilians. So in the last few wars, we've learned more and more about that. And as a result of that, because we can be very precise, and because civilians are particularly important in this war in the sense that we're a war of liberation, we will see a lot of targets not hit, and targets hit with smaller weapons than you might think, in order to very much minimize the civilian casualties and the collateral damage.
And also to mention that these weapons are not delivered by machinery and electronics alone, that it takes people, highly trained people, on the submarines that fire the Tomahawk, on the Navy ships that fire some of the cruise missiles, and the pilots in those 117s, that the human dimension tends to get overlooked on television at a time like this, because we have so many pictures of the equipment itself. Now, Al Jazeera, headquartered, of course, in the Persian Gulf, the Middle Eastern self-described Arab TV news channel, says that Saddam Hussein will address the Iraqi nation later in the day. Now, one might put an exclamation point behind that. Number one, is it true? We have no way of knowing it. Number two, if it turns out to be the case, it means one of two things. Either Saddam Hussein was not in the place that was hit by the Arab bombardment night, or he survived it. General Buck Kernan, I want to get back to this business of 2 Iraqi People's Army divisions reportedly, supposedly, allegedly ready to surrender. I want to go to the map so our viewers can understand the significance of this as well as possible. Most of our troop force is headquartered down here in Kuwait, most in northern Kuwait. And the plan, when after an additional, much bigger aerial bombardment begins, maybe in a few hours, maybe in a day or two, once it begins, almost immediately the plan is to have a land force move out of Kuwait here into southern Iraq. Basra, the second largest city in the country, is down here, and there's some oil fields down here. Now, we know that there were at least 2 Iraqi People's Army's divisions down here. Are these presumably the two of the People's Army divisions that are down here, to say nothing of the Republican Guard units, which, as I understand it, are not necessarily the elite, very best Republican Guard units, which are also here roughly in the area where the Euphrates River meets the Tigris River?
Yeah, I believe, given the fact that this was reported by the 3rd Infantry Division and their proximity to those conventional conscript divisions, that are closest to Basra, this is probably those divisions and not the Republican Guard divisions. So that's probably the two divisions that we're getting indications right now that are willing to surrender.
Now, let's go to another map and talk about the significance of that, General, if you will. That unlike the 1991 Gulf War, that there's absolutely positively no doubt this is go to Baghdad as quickly as possible, and at least to the outskirts of Baghdad, depending on how much resistance is expected to be in the city. Here's the point. If down here in Kuwait, if they launch off, when they launch off, expected to be within 24, 48 hours, Saturday night at the latest, is I understand that there'll be at least a three-pronged offensive coming out of here. Is that roughly your understanding?
Yeah, I think what they'll do is they'll drive as rapidly as they can to the northwest, toward Baghdad. They'll bypass those units that they don't have to engage, and in particular these two units that may surrender, and direct them to stay in their cantonment areas or wherever they happen to be right now. And as long as they don't get involved, they'll be safe. They'll cordon off those areas, those units, isolate those units from being able to interdict our operations, and drive northwest toward Baghdad. It'll be a multi-pronged attack. They'll use the high-speed avenues of approach, the road network, 6-lane highway heading into Baghdad from southeast to northwest, and they can also come cross-country to the west, swing around, and then come up to the north into Baghdad.
Okay, I want to quickly get to this and then move on. Tonight's attack was a precursor, if you will, a prelude to, quote, the big show, as the military calls it, which is yet to come. But when the big operation comes, likely to be very heavy aerial assault, if not all over Iraq, in many places in Iraq, but perhaps concentrated down in this area to a certain degree, because they want to move through here and get to the Mesopotamia Valley, Tigris River over here, the Euphrates here, and move up that valley to Baghdad as quickly as possible, correct?
Correct. We're going to create a dilemma for the Iraqis, where we're going to come at him from a multiple of directions.
And what happens if Saddam Hussein blows the dams? We know that there are at least two important dams roughly in this river, this area, one on the Euphrates, the other on the Tigris, which they were put there partly to drain the area where the Shiite Muslims were and punish them. But if he blows those dams, is it a showstopper?
No, it slows us down a little bit. We'll probably use an alternate route. We've got plenty of bridging material, and we can also come cross-country. So it's by no means is a showstopper.
And one of the two most important oil fields in the country, at least one of the two, is located roughly in this area down here.
That's
correct. He sets fire to the oil fields. Does that slow us down, and if so, how much? Well,
it'll slow us down on our visibility. But once again, we can bypass that. There's not much we can do if he was to set fire to those oil heads. So we, in all probability, would bypass them and then come in later with some support from contract oil experts to put them out.
Now, again, we want to emphasize, thank you, General Kernan, that this attack tonight was for a specific purpose. President Bush outlined it in his address to the nation earlier. The specific purpose was to hit a target where U.S. intelligence and military authorities believed that there were, David Martin says, possibly as many as 16 members of the hierarchy. We don't know whether that's a mixture of military and Ba'ath Party members. Simply don't know. There are rumors, unconfirmed reports, I italicized that Saddam Hussein, two of his sons, and some senior members were there. CBS News has no information, no solid information on that. So we try to be a sort of clearinghouse for rumors and unconfirmed reports, tell you what we know, what we don't know. We simply don't know whether Saddam Hussein was in fact believed to be in the target area tonight. One can reasonably assume, but it is an assumption, that perhaps he was among those believed to be in that target area, but we don't yet know it. Now, shortly after the attack, President Bush addressed the American people and the Iraqi people. He said this was the opening stage of what will be a, quote, broad and concerted campaign to disarm Iraq and free its people.
Yet our purpose is sure. The people of the United States and our friends and allies will not live at the mercy of an outlaw regime that threatens the peace with weapons of mass murder. We will meet that threat now with our Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, and Marines, so that we do not have to meet it later with armies of firefighters and police and doctors on the streets of our cities. Now that conflict has come, The only way to limit its duration is to apply decisive force.
Live picture in Baghdad. Sirens have just been heard in Baghdad again. Let's listen. Now we hear no explosions. This is the way things started in the dark, just before sunup, about, 3 hours ago, before sunup in Baghdad. But sirens went off. Now you can see it's daylight. No one on the roads. We don't see any. Well, there's a bus passing by, but very little activity, and only that activity has begun just very recently. We're going to leave this picture up just in case there is another aerial attack. But keep in mind that, among other things, it's very clear that one purpose of putting a signature attack on Baghdad this morning, the primary purpose to hit that specific target or targets where they thought there was a Iraqi Big Al meeting underway, but there's also a psychological effect that was intended here. General Stonewall Jackson, of the Stonewall Jackson fame of before and during the American Civil War, said, quote, "Always mystify, mislead, and surprise the enemy," unquote. You can say, well, it's pretty obvious. Well, it's worth repeating because unquestionably that was one of the purposes of this raid, to surprise, mystify, and perhaps mislead the Iraqis. We'll leave this picture up for a bit. Don't hear any explosions. Don't hear anything that sounds like approaching aircraft. And so we'll just leave this picture up for a moment as we continue to talk about that. What we'll continue to talk, I was listening to a report from Baghdad relayed to me that said that that could be a series of all clear sirens that were sounded. Again, we try not to speculate. We just suggest that that conceivably could be what's happening. But we'll see as time goes along. I want to return to what happened tonight. General Smith, how do they make assessments on how successful or unsuccessful this flight of the 117 stealths and the hitting in there with the Tomahawk missiles has been?
Well, of course, they've got intelligence resources now concentrating. They know the strike's coming in, so they're watching the strike carefully. They're watching the explosions. They're seeing how close the explosions are to the target area, to the exact aiming points they're shooting at, and they're watching all the anti-artillery and radars to see how active their air defense system is. So you learn a whole lot from this. What you don't get is precise bomb damage assessment from the ground. You don't get that from the ground, but you can get a whole lot from the air. We'll have reconnaissance airplanes coming over there today, looking at it very carefully. Did we miss the target? Did we hit the target? Do we need to go back tomorrow? The BDA, bomb damage assessment, is a very important mission, but it takes a little while to collect all that material.
And let us hope there were no civilian casualties. CBS News White House correspondent Bill Plant is at the White House. Bill?
Well, Dan, the president made a couple of points in his speech that he intended to try to get across to both America and to Iraq. He's telling the Iraqis that the U.S. will try very hard to spare innocent lives. And that, of course, is something that he wants Iraqis and the rest of the world, the Arab world particularly, to believe. He's also saying that the U.S. has no ambition in Iraq, meaning that the U.S. doesn't want to try to take over Iraq's oil, a charge that is being made in many parts of the world by people who oppose the U.S. intervention there. And he also had a message for Americans, Dan. He warned that this war may be longer and more difficult than people have been led to expect. And his press secretary earlier today was very explicit, saying Americans will lose lives in this war. Dan?
Bill Plant, reporting from the White House. U.S. officials now are saying, without their names attached to it, that the initial attack was aimed at what are called the most senior elements of the Iraqi leadership and were pinpointed, that's their word, by U.S. intelligence agencies. The results were not clear. Quote, one of these officials, U.S. intelligence had information pointing to targets of opportunity that might involve elements of the Iraqi leadership, might involve. The source declined to identify the targets by name, describing them only as, quote, a very senior leadership. And yes, you've heard some names kicked around in other places, but again, we can't confirm that whether or not Saddam Hussein and or any of his sons were believed to be in the target area tonight. That may become clear as the hours and days go by. Now, recapping what we know, U.S. forces have launched their campaign against Iraq, launched at least on a limited basis. They fired cruise missiles and bunker-busting bombs. Those are laser-guided bombs from F-117 stealth bombers. A so-called, and I quote the Defense Department now, surgical strike against Baghdad. It was aimed against some senior leaders of the Iraqi regime who were believed to be in a certain place. The attack shook the Iraqi capital with repeated explosions, first the cruise Tomahawk missiles, then the laser-guided bunker busters. No word yet on results. Shortly after the missiles struck, and you're looking and listening to the attack itself now, President Bush called it the opening stage of, quote, a broad and concerted campaign. The president emphasized that it might not be as short a war as some people believe it will be. Even before the ground war starts, we are told that some Iraqi divisions are ready to surrender. CBS News has a report from northern Kuwait that 2 People's Army divisions in Iraq are said to be ready to surrender. Stay with CBS News for the latest on America at War. When news breaks out, we'll break in.
March Madness on CBS. It's all here.
From New York, it's The Late Show with David Letterman. And guest host tonight is